They're both about my 3 favourite words, actually. And those words are... family! Family!
Encanto is the best movie to come out of Walt Disney Animation Studios in the 2020s. And I'd only give it an 8 out of 10, which is in sharp contrast to Pixar, DreamWorks, Alvin and Ghibli, where I'd have to give their best movies of the decade a rating higher than an 8. That's actually kinda depressing. For as much as I despise the studio, I want Disney to make good movies again. I don't want to be in this current stage where I'm actively not watching current Disney films out of spite because the movies look shit. I want a new movie like Encanto because, even though I have flaws with this movie, it's an overall great time with a lot of heart to it. It doesn't feel like corporate slop, it feels like a very genuine story which I really appreciate. But with that being said, it's definitely not as good for me now as it was back during the initial hype of its release. You see, I used to call this movie a masterpiece back in the day, but now I think it's just great. The parts which work really work, but there were equally quite a few parts which I just didn't click with on this rewatch. I mean, first of all, I only recently realised how little I actually care for many of the characters here. Now, I love the main characters like Mirabel and Abuela, but there's just way too many side characters, and for most of them, I can't really tell you a thing about them outside of their gift. That's why I don't remember their names and instead just refer to them as Weather Girl and Shapeshifting Kid. They just didn't do much for me, and I feel like you could have told the story just as well if you only had, say, Luisa, Isabella and Bruno. Oh, and that's without mentioning the fact that I actively began to dislike Dolores on this rewatch. Look, I know stan culture is going to want to kill me for saying this, but I just found her really annoying because it seems like she's constantly making things worse for others with no care whatsoever. I mean, she has super hearing. How does she not hear Bruno in the walls? Oh wait, she did hear him, yet she did absolutely nothing to help him. Bro, he's your uncle. He's been mistreated for years. The last thing you could do is help him. If you can hear everything, then surely you will know that he's actually a decent guy who's trying to help out behind the scenes. I'm sorry, but this was just a major plot hole which made so little sense to me. But whatever, maybe that was just an oversight from the writers. What isn't an oversight, however, is the fact that we can still explicitly see Dolores making things worse for Mirabel, whether it's embarrassing her in front of the kids by just casually dropping that Mirabel doesn't have a gift, or by telling everyone about her secret of the cracks for no reason. It was just so rude, and she could have at least talked to Mirabel about it if it really upset her, rather than just blurting it out for the whole family to hear. Oh, and I absolutely hate that stupid she does. It just shows how little she actually cares. Oh yeah, Mirabel doesn't have a gift. Oh yeah, I heard you and now I'm gonna reveal your secrets. Oh yeah, I can hear my vilified uncle trying to help us, but I'm not gonna do anything. Oh yeah, you can launch that bomb, Oppenheimer. Okay, I don't know why this segment has turned into a Dolores hate page. She just really annoyed me, that's all. And I promise you, I'm not saying this just to annoy Dolores stans, even if the Encanto fandom is really annoying. You can like what you like, I won't judge. This is just how I felt about the character. And alongside Dolores, I'll admit that the songs didn't blow me away this time around. The opening song felt like kinda clunky exposition, many of the songs in the second half were kinda forgettable for me, Bruno's rap at the end is real bad, and even We Don't Talk About Bruno loses its way in the second half for me when everyone starts talking over each other. I just really didn't like how that sounded. The first half of the song still slaps though, but Let It Go is still the better Byron Disney song. In spite of all of these criticisms though, Surface Pressure is still one of my favourite Disney songs. It's catchy, the visuals are very memorable, and, most of all, I resonate with what I had to say quite a lot. It's a very relatable song I feel, and I've gone back to it many times. I just love it to bits. So yeah, there's still plenty of things that I really like about Encanto. Dolores may annoy me and half the songs may not work for me, but the rest of the film still slaps, and it's definitely better than some people say. That's the weird thing actually. People either adore Encanto, or they really don't like it. And I'm just that weird guy in the middle who thinks it's great but with a few issues. And now that I've said why I don't love the film, let's talk about why I still like it. I think that the main thing which I loved about this movie was its message of family toxicity, as I thought that it was very well handled, particularly when it came to how Abuela was portrayed. You see, for most of the movie, you grow to really hate Abuela. She's controlling, passive-aggressive, and is constantly writing off Mirabel and blaming her for things which aren't even her fault. She's horrible, yet the film gives her depth and a well-meaning redemption arc. By the end of the film, she realizes the error of her ways and actually apologizes for her actions in a beautiful moment where I can actually sympathize with her. And no, this scene does not justify or excuse her abuse like some people have claimed. Unlike Namari, Abuela actually owns up to her own mistakes and never blames Mirabel for what she did. She's actively making a step in the right direction to improve herself, and to me, that's okay. And I find it so funny that this perfectly good message came out in the same year as Raya's butchered message. Like, how does this even happen? And on the topic of this ending, I honestly like how low-key it is. In fact, I like how low-key the whole movie is. Most of the film takes place in this one house and is primarily focused on the characters, and I think that really works for me. Not only is the house a really nice location to be in, but it keeps the focus on the drama instead of taking time away to show new locations or something. I know some people didn't like how minimalist this film was, but I personally really liked it because I appreciate low-key human dramas which focus in on the character stuff instead of bogging it down with other unnecessary ideas. So no, I don't have a problem with the resolution of this film being nothing more than a hug. It fits in and I thought that it was beautiful. Oh, and speaking of beautiful, Abuela's backstory was heartbreaking and so well done. And alongside this main theme of generational trauma and family abuse, I thought that the film had great themes related to pressure, as I previously mentioned with Luisa, but also ostracization, which is obviously present within Mirabel. I kinda like the reversal of Mirabel being the normal one in the family due to no gift, and that's why she feels out of place. That's a unique idea, and it works within the context of this film. And as I said earlier, I just really liked Mirabel as a character. Not only was it great to hear that Gina finally lived her dream of being in a musical, but I just found Mirabel to be quite relatable on the whole. Although I am still more of a Luisa stan. Seriously, why do people obsess over Dolores when Luisa is right there? Oh, and I also love Bruno. He's great. I even had a dream about him once where him and Ned Flanders had to stop Mongo from Shrek 2 from destroying a wedding at my school. No, I'm not joking. I have very weird dreams. But anyway, I think that's pretty much everything that I needed to cover about this movie. Although, I do have one more thing which I want to say. Does anyone else find the animation for this movie kinda off? Like, the backgrounds are amazing and the musical sequences are really creative and fun, but some of these character designs just feel weird to me. Am I the only one who thinks this, or do you see where I'm coming from? In fact, whilst this movie is better than Raya in practically every way, I actually do prefer the animation in Raya. The backgrounds are even better there, and the character designs just look more normal. I don't know what the issue is with Encanto, I've just always felt it. But anyway, I still really like Encanto on the whole. Not every character or song is perfect for me, but the stuff which lands here really lands, and it is still the only recent Disney movie which is actually worth your time. With that being said though, I hate the fact that it won the Oscar because this award, more than any other, felt so rigged in Disney's favour that I was actively rooting against it winning. And I know that I'm not the only one who felt that way. And that's without mentioning the fact that there are also 3 other movies from this batch which I prefer to Encanto. Speaking of which...
Buongiorno. Signore, piacere.
Luca is a really nice, pleasant, chill vibes movie, and that's kinda it. Truth be told, Luca doesn't have that much going for it, but it's a good time nonetheless, so I really don't mind. It's a really gorgeous movie which is very enjoyable, and I'll always be up for rewatching it. I just equally think that it's maybe a bit too low-key and without much substance. Now granted, it was nice to see a pleasant vibes movie without much of a plot from a mainstream studio like Pixar, and I can see why so many people loved the feel of this movie, but it doesn't always stick with me. I usually love low-key vibe movies, but that's because they usually still have something going on thematically, in spite of little to no story. Studio Ghibli is a master of plotless movies, which are still compelling because of what's under the surface. Luca, meanwhile, doesn't really have that as much. I mean, it definitely does have some compelling themes about acceptance and find the place where you belong, but not every part of the movie really links into that. I mean, for instance, Luca feels out of place in the town because he's secretly a sea monster, but when the truth is revealed, it feels like it's only the villain who's dissing him. This shows to me that the theme could have been expanded upon a little bit further. In fact, I'd argue that this film either didn't need a villain, or it should have made the villain better, because as it stands, this loser just doesn't really do much for me. So yeah, I like Luca because it's chill, but part of me thinks that maybe it's a bit too chill. This means that whilst I enjoy watching it, it doesn't stick with me as much as other films, and considering the fact that no one really talks about this movie nowadays in spite of the initial hype, I think I'm not the only one who feels this way. But I'd still love to see more mainstream studios doing low-key films like this more often. Nowadays, I find myself gravitating towards these kinds of stories more than some big epic blockbuster, because it's nice to just slow down and watch characters vibe for a bit. And thankfully, the characters are really nice here. Luca and Alberto have a brilliant dynamic with each other, and I got so much enjoyment out of just watching them hang out. I also really like Julia. I think she's a great middle ground between the two characters. Although, whilst I do like Julia, I honestly think that I like her dad more. Not only is his character design just peak, I mean I love this Tim Lockwood look, but I also really liked how he sort of developed into Alberto's new father figure. It's clear that Alberto has a deadbeat dad, so it's nice to see him find someone new in his life, and that fire scene where Alberto opened up was just fantastic. However, Whilst I do love the characters, I'll admit that some of the drama with Alberto near the end felt a bit forced. But oh well, most of the film's still fine. As for some other things I loved, I did still think that the themes were really good here whenever they were present. Like I said, some could have been expanded upon a little bit further, but I do still like the way that they were implemented. And I especially loved the ending quote.
Some people, they'll never accept him, but some will. And he seems to know how to find the good ones.
Not only does this link in well to the theme of finding your place in the world and dealing with prejudice, but it's just a really brilliant quote which I, and a lot of other people, especially from the LGBT community, really connect with. And alongside these strong characters and ideas, I just love the Italianness of this movie. Yeah, I love Italy. I've barely been there, but I still love it. And I love movies set in Italy as well. So naturally, this movie works wonders for me. So overall, Luca just has a great vibe to it. The animation is gorgeous and makes the environment really pop, and it's just so nice to watch. If this film had a bit more going for it under the surface, and some of the plot threads around the second half were tightened up a bit, then this could very easily be one of my favourite Pixar films. But as it stands, the vibes are strong, so I do still really like it, and I get why other people may love it even more than I do, but I just personally wanted a bit more. Still, it's fun, charming, it's got a good heart, and it's Italian. What more do you want? Of course it deserved a nomination this year. In fact, I think we're at the point in the ranking where you can just assume that most movies deserve to be here, and Luca is no exception.
And now for something completely different.
The end point of capitalism. The bottom line, where human life has no value at all.
Boy in the World probably takes the cake for being the single most unique film from this entire list. Like, there are definitely plenty of art house movies here, but none of them feel as different as this film. Seriously, this film is unlike anything I have ever seen before, so much so that it's probably the most unique animated film I've ever seen, alongside The Wolf House. And coincidentally, both films are from South America, with The Wolf House being from Chile and this being from Brazil. Huh, I guess I should keep my eye out for South American animation in the future then. But yeah, I really liked this film. It's so creative, and its visuals truly stand out from the pack. But I imagine that a lot of you probably haven't heard of this film, because it is one of the least logged films from this entire list on Letterboxd. In fact, I think Chico and Rita is the only film which has been logged less. So what is this film actually about? I don't really know how to explain. I guess the best way I could describe it is this. Do you all remember when you were a kid and the world seemed so whimsical, and because all of your experiences were brand new, you would just let your imagination constantly run wild? Well, this movie aims to recapture those feelings. We follow the titular boy make his way through various different set pieces in contemporary Brazil, and we see how his imagination perceives them. Nothing in this film is to be taken literally, it's all an imaginative reinterpretation created to fall in line with the mind of a child who can't fully comprehend the world yet. This leads to the animation becoming absolutely gorgeous and vibrant and colourful because, you know, children don't like drab worlds, so they instead perceive it as being more colourful than it is. That's why the world here is mostly white rather than black or grey, and this really helps to make the background seem friendlier and thus the colours pop a lot more. But alongside the colours, the specific visual language of this film is allowed to be very creative in how it portrays certain objects or people. When humans see something they don't fully understand, they look at it in a different way which they can understand. This happens to everyone, but it mostly happens to us in our childhood, because the world is so brand new to us and there are so many things which you can't quite fully understand. And this film uses this little quirk in psychology to its advantage by portraying various bits of machinery as different animals. The boy perceives a steam train as a smoking caterpillar, boats as ducks, and tanks as tortoises. The boy doesn't know what these things actually are due to his young age and rural upbringing, and so he perceives them as different animals as he's more familiar with said animals, and so he uses that in order to help him understand what he's seeing. That is absolute genius visual storytelling right there, and I am just obsessed with the way that this film looks. The animation just constantly intrigues me and encourages me to look deeper into the film, which thus makes the viewing experience more engaging during some of the more simpler scenes in the first half. Admittedly, this film doesn't really have much of a plot, as it's just kind of the boy wandering from one area to another, so caught up in his imagination that he's kind of just moseying on through life. But it works for the most part, because there's so much to latch onto in regards to the visuals, and I just wanted to see more creative imagery here. This film successfully recaptured the childhood feelings of wonder about the world that I used to have, and it does so through its unique presentation. Once again, it's just genius. I also think it's worth mentioning that the unique visuals help to make this film a lot easier to understand in comparison to some of the other dialogueless movies. With a lot of the other films, I had a hard time registering what the film was trying to say because it was mostly a normal looking animated movie, but with no dialogue. This, on the other hand, went full on art house, which thus helped my feelings of disconnection loop all the way around to become something that I could actually understand for the most part. Now yes, there were admittedly still some parts that I was confused about, which I'll discuss later, but on the whole, the visuals helped to make this movie a lot more immersive for me. And alongside the visuals, there's also a lot of narrative substance within the film, particularly when we get into the more political aspects of the film by the second half. You see, the film starts off by showing the wonders of the world, and it ends by showing how the beauty of the world, as well as childhood innocence, have both been destroyed by capitalism.
It's a metaphor for capitalism.
And how does it do that? Well, you know this bloke that the boy was hanging out with. I think it's fair to say that this guy looks pretty depressed due to the fact that he's stuck working long hours in a labour-intensive job before going home to this super-packed city. Yeah, it really doesn't look like a nice life, to be honest. I wonder who this guy actually is. Wait a minute! He was the boy?! What's happened to his wonder and imagination? Oh yeah, he grew up and had to get a job. Well, that sucks, doesn't it? So yeah, that's the loss of childhood innocence part. And as for the environmentalism, well, remember that this film is Brazilian. And what's a big environmental issue in Brazil? The deforestation of the Amazon rainforest. And how does this film portray that issue? Well, you see, it doesn't just show the damage caused from the boy's perspective. Like, yeah, we see the slash and burn techniques taking place in the animation at first, but then the animated footage burns away and we are treated with some lovely live action footage of the issues happening in real life. My jaw was on the floor at this moment because I was not expecting it to happen, but that just made it a hell of a lot more effective for me, and I absolutely adored this moment. It really reinforced the idea that this is a major problem happening in our world. It's not a movie problem. And speaking of real life political issues, this film also threw in some criticisms of the Brazilian government. How? By showing the brutal massacre of a peace protest! I'm sorry, what? Well, okay, it doesn't explicitly show it, but it's still effective because we're seeing it all through the boy's innocent imagination. And honestly, this is probably the best usage of the visuals within this whole movie. You see, music plays a key part in this movie, and the main piece of music from the film is being sung by the protesters to form this beautiful bird. Meanwhile, the military forms its own bird made of this dirty black smoke, and we see the clash between the peaceful protesters and the military, and by extension the government, through the birds fighting each other, until the songbird dies and we are left with these haunting images showing the aftermath of the protest. Let me tell you, I was not expecting this movie to become so heavy and intense by the end. It started out so whimsical that this really threw me off. In a good way though. So yeah, there is just so much to love here. Although, I will admit that I do kind of wish that the pacing was a bit better here. Now, it was definitely better paced than something like The Red Turtle for me, but it equally did drag a bit at some points, particularly in its first half. I don't necessarily think that this needed to be a short film, but I do think that 60 minutes would have been the sweet spot in terms of runtime. As I alluded to before, the story is quite thin here, and I understand why it was, but it also means that it's harder to remain consistently engaged when it's stretched out for longer than it needs to be. And alongside my issues with the pacing, there are also a few plot points which I was kinda confused by, which does took me out of the film. Like, the twist where the boy grew up to become the man, and later the old guy shown near the start, was a good one on paper, but in execution, I didn't really get it. Like, how did the boy see his future self? And if he never really left his farmhouse to find his dad, then how did he experience the world around him which we saw within the film? Look, I'll be honest, I probably missed something super obvious here, but it did still leave you with more questions than answers by the time the film wrapped up. Also, I don't really get the point of the stuff with the boy's dad at the very start. The dad leaving to work is the catalyst for the boy journeying out into the world, but it doesn't really get paid off by the end, and so it kinda just makes some parts of the opening feel a bit unnecessary in the long term. But those are my only major flaws, and to be honest, I hate to criticize this movie because I am honestly so impressed with it. It's such a bold risk of a movie which could have so easily been a catastrophic failure. I mean, I know you could say that about most art house movies, but this one especially stood out as being especially risky. But I'm so glad that it was successful and I got a chance to see it for this list, as it probably would have flown under my radar otherwise. Hopefully me talking about it in this video will encourage some of you to check it out too, because it is definitely worth a watch. And to think, this is my least favourite film of the 2015 batch. Yeah, this batch was a really, really good one. I think the Academy definitely picked the best 5 films of this year, so Boy in the World 100% deserved a nomination, just like everything else. I can't wait to talk about some of these other films though, as a few of them are very interesting to discuss. But that's for another time. We've got some other films which we need to talk about first.
Pull the string! Pull the string!
Do you ever watch a movie and immediately feel mad at yourself as soon as it's over because you never watched it as a kid and you just know that you would have loved it if you did? Yeah, I felt that a few times, and one of the most recent examples of this trend for me is with Kubo and the Two Strings, because my goodness, this movie just has so much that I know I would have adored if I saw it as a young lad back in 2016. I already mentioned before that I love adventure movies, and this film really ticks all of the right boxes when it comes to that genre. The locations are constantly changing, which leads to no two parts of the movie feeling similar. The film can be really exciting and entertaining at some points, and really dramatic at others, and the action is sprinkled throughout the runtime in just the right way, and the action scenes themselves are stellar as well. This was basically all I wanted from a movie as a kid, and so I already know that this film would have been a real favourite for me back in the day. So it's a shame that my first exposure to it is as a cynical adult who can't rate it as highly as I would have done as a kid, as there are some things missing here for me to fully love it nowadays. However, let's not bog ourselves down with the negatives, and instead, we'll begin by highlighting the great stuff present here. I think the big thing which deserves a compliment when it comes to this film is the animation. My goodness, this has got to be one of the most stunning stop motion movies I have ever seen. Scratch that, one of the most stunning films I have ever seen. Just look at this amazing lighting, and the brilliant cinematography, and the phenomenal use of angles, which is extra impressive when you remember just how small claymation figures are. I mean, just look at the origami fight scene. Look at it! How the hell was this done? I have no idea. Surely these things were tiny, how on earth did the animators move them so well? In fact, all of the papery effects looked amazing throughout this entire movie, and not just the start. And obviously, the other action scenes are spectacular too. And that's without mentioning the phenomenal visual effects, such as with the guitar scenes, which was so good that they actually garnered this film a well-deserved Best Visual Effects Oscar nomination, thus making it one of the few animated movies to get an Oscar nom outside of the one category being covered within this video. But alongside the beautiful visuals, I just found the story really compelling, to be honest. Yes, it is a bit of a basic fetch quest, but I don't know, I found myself getting really into it thanks to the different set pieces that I mentioned earlier. Although, I think the main reason for why I was engaged was thanks to the side cast present here. Monkey Mother and Matthew McConaughey Beetle were both really fun sidekicks to have on the adventure, and their dynamic with each other was just pitch perfect and got so many laughs out of me. Beetle's stupidity was especially hilarious, but I also loved how badass Monkey was. She wielded a sword like it was nothing, and I loved every scene with her. But another reason for why I love these characters is because of how much they very clearly cared for Kubo. It's clear that the theme of love permeates throughout this entire film, which thus means that strong character bonds were important for the story, and we certainly got it thanks to these characters who truly cared for Kubo, due to the fact that, in reality, they're his parents. I truly bought the familial connection between them, and was thus devastated when they were killed and Kubo was essentially left with no one. But even before the monkeyness, I did still love Kubo and his mother's relationship near the start of the movie. All things considered, the opening to this film is pretty low-key, but that really gave time to show the sweet love between the mother and son, until it is tragically taken away as Kubo believes that his mother is dead. You know, this constant acknowledgement of death actually leads me on to my next point. I quite like the more serious tone of this film. Whilst it does still have its fair share of lighter moments, the story is quite dark at points as characters either die or are believed to have died, and the severity of the conflict is highlighted a lot here. The film treats its story like it's a big deal, which thus helps in my engagement of it. And that also leads me on to talking about the villains, who are honestly pretty scary here. Like, I was actually on the edge of my seat whenever the two sisters rocked up. They were honestly terrifying, and were such effective antagonists that they somehow overshadow Ralph Fiennes as the big bad at the end. So yeah, this film has got strong visuals, an engaging story, and some of the characters are fantastic. However, I'm sorry, but Kubo was such a bland protagonist for me. All of his friends and enemies were really cool, but Kubo himself has basically nothing to him outside of being the hero boy. As I was watching this film, I was constantly asking myself, who is Kubo? Really? And I just couldn't figure it out. Like, his personality isn't that well defined, and I couldn't picture what he was like when I wasn't watching this film. If I think of characters from the movie Kubo and the Two Strings, I ironically enough never think of Kubo. So yeah, that was the main thing holding this film back for me from calling it something fantastic. But even alongside that, I don't actually think that the tone balance is perfect here. Yes, I do like comedic moments in more serious stories like this, but I think that there was a bit too much tonal whiplash present within this movie at some points, with the goofier moments in the first half especially, feeling really out of place. As an example, there's a scene where Kubo goofs around with the paper and tries to target Monkey Mother with it. It's a humorous scene on its own, but it comes too soon after the big inciting incident which, from the perspective of Kubo at this point in the movie, led to the death of his mother and all of the townspeople. Yes, his mother is in the monkey, which sounds so weird out of context, and the townspeople are all okay, but Kubo doesn't know this. Yet, in spite of that, he seems perfectly chipper about everything and is happily doing all this paper plane chicanery rather than processing what really happened. I don't know, it just took me out of the film a bit to be honest. However, neither of these points are a huge deal for me, as I did still enjoy the rest of this film quite a lot, and I just know that if I did have a nostalgic tie to this movie, then it would be at least 20 spots higher on this list, because these issues wouldn't bother me as much. All in all, I thought that Kubo and the Two Strings was a banger movie which deserved both of its Oscar nominations. It ain't perfect, but I certainly found myself enjoying the story quite a lot, whilst also gawking at the top tier animation present. I just wish that I saw it as a kid. Seriously, why the hell did I watch The Box Trolls and not this?
So please give a warm Isle of Dogs welcome to
Anderson! I fucking love Wes Anderson. Yep, I'm one of those guys. Now, I know full well that Wes is quite a Marmite director, just like Tim Burton. Whilst there are many people who love him, there are just as many people who can't stand his work. And I can see why. Wes obviously has an incredibly unique style to him, which causes his films to sort of fall into their own genre, which is unlike anything else. We all know the hallmarks of a Wes Anderson movie: symmetrical shots, bright colours, deadpan humour, and so many recognisable actors who are always fun to point out. Many of his films follow this kind of formula, particularly his recent work. He's got a style to him and he's unwilling to change it. He just knows what people like from him. And it's for all of these reasons that many people hate his work. If you don't like this style, you're probably not going to like it very much. However, I personally love this style so much. I love colour and I love pretty movies, as evident from the fact that I'm an animation fan, so this visual style is naturally a massive win for me, and the sense of humour of his movies are also right up my alley. As you can expect, because I'm British, I enjoy dry wit, and Wes captures that same vibe perfectly in spite of being an American. However, alongside liking Wes's movies for pure aesthetics alone, I honestly think that the films have a lot more heart and substance behind them than many people give them credit for. One of the most common criticisms for Wes Anderson is the fact that his movies are too style over substance, especially nowadays. And whilst I will agree that movies like The Life Aquatic and The French Dispatch are maybe a bit lacking thematically or emotionally, I still think that most of his films have the heart that I'm looking for, and I often appreciate how understated the emotion can be at points, whether it's the simple familial connections of the Darjeeling Limited, or the hidden grief of Asteroid City, or the looming tragedy of the Grand Budapest Hotel. I think that there's plenty of emotion running through all of these movies, and that's without talking about the Royal Tenenbaums, because fuck me! That movie is... just watch it. Seriously. Yeah, I'm definitely a Wes stan. I've seen all of his movies, and I think that some of his work, like the Royal Tenenbaums and the Grand Budapest Hotel, are just masterful. Hell, I'm such a fan of his work that The Phoenician Scheme was one of my most hyped movies for the whole year, and thankfully, I ended up really liking that film. It's not my absolute favourite from Wes, as it is maybe playing things a bit too safe, but I still had a blast with it. So yeah, you get the idea. I love Wes, and I am so glad that I get to talk about him in detail within this ranking, just like I did with Tim Burton, because Wes has made 2 stop-motion movies which are both eligible for this list. And honestly, it makes total sense that he's made animated movies. He's so meticulous with his world building and where he blocks his actors, so it's no wonder why he excels in the medium, particularly in stop motion specifically, where he can truly control everything to the finest detail. In fact, on a slightly unrelated note, if you're someone who hasn't really watched that many live action movies, I genuinely recommend checking out Wes Anderson. Many of his films feel like what I can only describe as live action animated films. They're quirky, colourful, and they break the rules of reality in order to tell a much more creative and vibrant story. It may be right up your alley, especially if you happen to watch and love his stop motion work. And speaking of which, let me get back on topic. The first of the 2 stop motion movies which I'm going to talk about now is Isle of Dogs, which is a movie that I really like. But I do understand some of the flaws that other people may have with it. You see, before the 2020s decade, Isle of Dogs was probably Wes's most divisive film, even amongst his fans. Actually, second most divisive. The Life Aquatic definitely has much more mixed reviews. But either way, whilst there were many people who loved Isle of Dogs, there were also many people who just didn't really click with it due to some of the glaring issues that they had with it. And I can see why. Whilst I do really love most of this film, I can definitely agree that it's not one of Wes's best, because the characters could have done with another draft, I feel. Although, I do love Chief as the protagonist. Not only is Bryan Cranston always a win, but I just loved his arc over the film where he grew to care for Atari. Now yes, the storyline is a bit predictable, but I don't personally think that predictability is a bad thing within this context, as I care much more about how the story is executed, and I would definitely say that it's executed very well here. The growing bond between the characters is gradual and always compelling, and there's certain scenes with Chief that I just adore. I especially love the favourite food stuff with him. The story he told near the start of the film was very interesting to listen to, and I think it also does a great job at showing how compelling Wes's dialogue can be, as I was engaged with everything that Chief had to say even without any accompanying visuals. But this moment became even better for me when it was paid off later after Chief found a new favourite food thanks to Atari. I don't know why that scene warmed my heart so much, but it just did. It's so nice, honestly. Wes can't do emotion, my ass. I also really like Spots. I like the way that his and Chief's roles kind of reversed as the film went on, and I think that the pair of them made for a great double act, which led to a lot of great drama by the film's end. And I can confirm that I was emotionally invested when Spots nearly died at the end of the film. Again, the fake out death is kinda cliche, but it still works for me here. So yeah, these main characters are really great. But the side cast could have done with some work. Atari kinda just feels like the kid, and that's it. And the side dogs, whilst entertaining, don't have much to them. Yes, I enjoyed watching them, and I love the dry wit that they had. As I said, Wes's wit is right on my alley. But they don't have much of a personality outside of maybe one or two things. In fact, I barely even remember their names. I just call them the witty Ed Norton one, the depressed Bill Murray one, the Jeff Goldblum one who's always talking about the rumors, and the Bob Balaban one. Seriously, what did he do? And that's really it. Throughout this film, they just felt like window dressing who are only there to deliver the trademark Wes Anderson wit. Yet narratively, it feels like Ed Norton is the only one of the four who actually gets a significant screen presence. Honestly, this is kind of a problem that I have with a few of Wes's films. His characters are entertaining, but sometimes his ensembles are so big that not every character is the most fleshed out or interesting under the surface. Like, I really liked Asteroid City, but I think I only really cared about a couple of the characters, whilst the rest just didn't really have much going for them. But hey, these dogs are harmless inclusions, and they do bring a lot of entertainment to the film, so I didn't mind them too much. Also, random point, but I honestly think that Edward Norton needs to do more voice acting. He's got a really good voice which works really well here, and I think that he could do a great job in other films. However, whilst the dogs were harmless inclusions, I think that some of the other characters were desperate for further expansion. I mean, Chief has a Scarlett Johansson love interest, but I don't really care too much as she hasn't got much going for her sadly. And conversely, there's Tracy, who has a lot going for her narratively, yet I just don't like her very much. Which is probably the coldest take I could give towards this movie, as I haven't found a single person who likes her character, which is very strange because she's not even annoying or anything. Yet she still ranks as one of the worst characters that Wes Anderson has ever created, because she just doesn't fit within this movie. In a movie all about Japanese corruption, it just feels weird to have this random girl from Ohio come in and lead the revolution, instead of someone who's actually from the country being affected. I was initially really excited to see a different culture presented in this movie through the human stuff, and I like the contrast between the English-speaking dogs and the Japanese inhabitants. But Tracy just clashed so hard in the wrong way, and it really took me out of the film at points. Not to mention, she just doesn't have much going for her outside of her own political goals. Like, I want to know why she cares so much about Kobayashi's corruption specifically. Like, she's a foreign exchange student, why does she care about Japan's problems when she could spend her time sorting out the corruption in her own country? I just don't get it. And the big kicker for her, which everybody loves to bring up for perfectly understandable reasons, is the fact that she develops a crush on Atari. She's 17. Atari is 12. Look, Wes, I know you have a fetish for young men getting with older women, see Rushmore, The Grand Budapest Hotel, and The French Dispatch, but this is just... no. Just no. Look, I can defend a lot of this movie. I still enjoy most of the characters after all, despite them being bland, and I still enjoy the story despite it being predictable. But there is no way in hell that I'm defending this. Fuck that. With that being said though, Tracy is not my least favourite Wes Anderson character, as Timothée Chalamet's girlfriend in The French Dispatch was way more annoying. But still, Tracy's not great. Look, I love you, Greta Gerwig, but nah, this just ain't it. So yeah, these clear flaws stop this movie from being one of the West's masterpieces. And that's a shame, because if Tracy wasn't as prominent and the other dogs had a bit more depth to them, this would easily shoot up to be maybe top 20 material for this list. I'm dead serious, I really do adore so much about this movie. I already went into detail about how much I love Chief's character arc, which I think does make up for some of the other character blunders, but alongside that, I think that thematically, this film is very strong. It's particularly got a lot of great ideas related to propaganda, and how politicians weaponize that to achieve their own personal goals. This is primarily shown through the anti-dog mayor, Kobayashi. He's been raised to hate dogs, and he uses his own lies and propaganda to achieve his own personal goals. And as a result, the population has been successfully brainwashed, and the little guys are the ones who have to pay the price. This film came out in 2018, and unfortunately this idea is still ever present today, but that helps to make this film even more effective for me. Now admittedly, I used to think that Kobayashi was a bit of a bland villain, as all he really seemed to do was spout political nonsense and lies without much of his own personality. But nowadays, I would actually disagree with that opinion. I think that he does have a bit more depth to him under the surface, particularly through how we see the ways that other people's values have impacted on him. Obviously we know that his own values have influenced the culture around him, thus leading to anti-dog sentiment, but his own ancestors' values have also impacted upon him. He's been raised by the crazy cat family, and so it's no wonder why these harmful ideas spread down to him, as he's been forced to blindly follow traditions. And that really helps to give a lot more impact to his redemption where, despite everything, he's still willing to give Atari his kidney, thus saving his life. He broke the tradition he's bound to in order to do something good, which I thought was really great to see, and it didn't come out of nowhere for me, as I think that the impact of other, better people like Atari allowed for him to grow naturally. But I equally liked how he still got punished at the end, as he is still a bad guy, even if the scene of a corrupt politician serving time was only included to remind you that this film is simply a work of fiction. Either way, this was just really good drama which led to a brilliant final act. Funnily enough, on my first viewing of this film, I didn't mind Tracy, yet I had issues with Kobayashi. But now, my opinions have completely flipped, and I like Kobayashi, but have issues with Tracy. It's interesting how my overall feelings towards this movie have stayed the same over time, whilst the more specific opinions have completely changed. But anyway, back to the themes. I also liked how the propaganda ideas even extended towards the dogs, specifically the so-called cannibal dogs, and how they are perceived as cannibals, when in reality, it was only one desperate incident which led to that outcome. In truth, they're perfectly normal dogs, and are rightfully offended at being called cannibals. And speaking of the dogs, I found it interesting to see the ways that they have lost their identity as a result of their time on Trash Island. Identity is a bit of a common theme that you see in dystopian stories like this, and I think that it works really well here, particularly with Chief's arc where he develops more of a softer side, which thus allows him to be more than just the grumpy leader dog. In fact, in general, I love the world building of this movie. Trash Island is such a unique place, and the visuals of this film obviously bring the world to life in amazing ways. I mean, obviously this is the case. It's Wes Anderson for goodness sake. The shots are amazing, the colours pop, there's plenty of quirky things happening on screen, and I love the stylized moments within the animation, such as the fight cloud and the screens being 2D animated whilst everything else is in stop motion. It's cool. And speaking of the animation, that sushi scene deserves all of its praise. It may have given me Paddock flashbacks, but damn it, that's a well animated scene right there. Hands down one of the most satisfying scenes from this whole list. And as for some final things that I love here, the film is consistently really funny, the music is fantastic, and the pacing is really strong on the whole. The story was always moving, and I think that the film was structured in quite a unique way with the chapters and the constant flashbacks and everything, and that helped to keep things interesting for me throughout. So overall, because of my constant praise for Chief, the themes, the visuals, and the wit, it's clear that no issues with the characters can fully dampen Isle of Dogs for me. I still love so much about it to the point that I don't even care about its flaws. That's why this movie is ultimately ranked higher than other great movies which I also found flaws with, like Song of the Sea for instance. I just got a lot more enjoyment out of the overall package here. What can I say? I'm an annoying Wes Anderson simp. I fully understand if you hate this movie, but I personally loved it. I eagerly await Wes's next film, and I especially hope that he'll do a new stop motion movie at some point, because this man knows how to use the medium to the fullest potential. And I can't wait to talk about his earlier animated work much later on this list.
I'm a knight.
I'm a knight.
And I'm a knight.
It is honestly a miracle that we are actually able to watch Nimona. When Disney bought Blue Sky, they tried their hardest to wipe this film from the face of the earth. In spite of the fact that it seems like a large chunk of it was complete, Disney did a Warner Brothers and pulled the plug. I don't know why, maybe it was because it wasn't marketable to China or something. But boy oh boy, I'm sure they regret the decision now. Everybody loves Nimona, and it would have been one of the best things to come out under the Disney umbrella in recent years. But it's not, because they decided to be twats. Screw you, Disney. Although I can't believe I have to thank Netflix for bringing this film back. I hate them too, but at least we get to watch this film, so I can forgive them in this case. Anywho, enough of ranting about big corporations. Let's talk about Nimona, a movie all about criticizing the institution. There's some strange coincidences here. Anyway, I love so much about Nimona. I never personally read the original graphic novel when I was younger, so I had absolutely no idea what to expect before going in. But my goodness, I had a blast with this film. It was such an entertaining ride, which perfectly fit my style of chaotic humour. But the main reason for why I liked it was because it wasn't just a comedy, and instead it actually has something substantial to say about prejudice and media propaganda. Now, obviously, films which show how damaging it is to pass judgment onto others who are different are absolutely nothing new. In fact, there's another movie later on this list which feels very similar to this movie in many ways. However, once again, I don't care if a plot point has been done before, so long as it's still executed well. So I still enjoy the inclusion of this idea despite it being pretty common. Furthermore, I also think that there were two main factors here which helped this film to stand out from other similar films. The first factor regards the aforementioned secondary theme of media propaganda, and how governments always love to deflect blame off of themselves, thus causing problems for the little guy. Now obviously, this theme works well enough on its own through the main story of the director framing Ballister for the assassination. It was disgusting to see, but it was satisfying to see her eventually exposed. Side note, it was really funny to see the director respond to this exposure by making a YouTuber-ass apology video. I mean, she literally just went around saying, "Oh, it's not me, don't believe the allegations." I was half expecting it to pull out the bloody ukulele at some point. However, the story about the director's corruption also leads in well to the main theme of prejudice once again, as a result of the fact that the media and the institution eventually tried to make Nimona look like a villain, even to the point that Ballister was successfully manipulated. And why was Nimona painted this way? Because she was different. That's literally the only reason. Because she can shapeshift, she was seen as a monster. And in spite of the fact that Gloreth knew Nimona was fine in her childhood, she was still pressured into turning against her due to the prejudice of those around her. This perfectly shows how people are not born prejudiced, and instead, they become one as a result of the environment around them. It's why we need to make an active effort to stop progressive ideas. In general, I just thought that Nimona's whole backstory scene was fantastic and heartbreaking, and it came in at just the right moment in the story. At this point, our trust for Nimona has reached an all-new low, as we also begin to believe the lies that's being spread. I mean, the evidence does look pretty bad on the surface. But the flashback comes in to reaffirm to us that Nimona is in fact a good person, and we immediately sympathise with her once again, and thus want her and Ballister to reunite to defeat the real monster. Never underestimate the importance of finding the right moment in the narrative to reveal a backstory. When it's done well, it can be incredibly effective, and Nimona is a great example of this. So yeah, I think that the theme of prejudice works really well in this film, thanks to how it ties into Nimona's backstory, and the secondary themes of media manipulation. But the other reason for why this theme works here, and helps this film to stand out from other similar films, is because of how it links into the additional LGBT themes present here. As I alluded to earlier when saying that this film isn't marketable to China, Nimona is a film with prominent gay people in it, and there's absolutely no denying it. Ballister is openly gay, he has a boyfriend for goodness sake. Now obviously, this is amazing to see on its own. The representation is fantastic here, and it's way better than all the corporate representation that Disney does, because it actually feels genuine in this case, and is a key part of this film's identity. Oh, and as an aside, I know people like to bitch and moan about how we shouldn't have LGBT relationships in movies which my kids are gonna watch because they won't understand it and I can't be asked to explain what being gay is. Well, first of all, your laziness is your own problem, and secondly, by that logic we shouldn't show hetero relationships to kids as they're too young to fully understand that as well, but no one cares about that being an issue, so why is this any different? If you genuinely don't know how to explain gay people to your kids, here's a template for you. Most people are right-handed, yet some people are left. That's just how it is, but that doesn't make them any worse. Boom, you're done. Kids are smarter than you think, most of them will understand homosexuality, and quite frankly, they won't give a shit if a relationship is gay or straight. They only have an issue with LGBT couples if they're surrounded by people who make it seem like a problem. So don't do that. Educate your kids. It's not as hard as it seems, and if movies like Nimona can make this incredibly important conversation a lot easier for some people, then that's a wonderful thing. You're definitely going to get more out of Nimona's representation than you are anything by Disney. I mean, I know there are gay people in Strange Worlds, but I haven't seen that movie, so I don't know if the representation is actually good or not. I just hate the fact that people blamed gayness for Strange World's failure, as that definitely wasn't the problem. Anyway, Where was I? Sorry, I kind of went on a bit of a tangent there, but it was an important tangent to be fair. We do need more unapologetic representation like Nimona's. But back to the film itself, the LGBT representation is great here on its own, but it also ties in really well to the main themes here. As we all unfortunately know, homosexual relationships were seen as sinful for the longest time. It's only recently that's become more accepted. Yet at the same time, most of the world is still horrible about it, including the supposed land of the free. This therefore means that it's very easy to draw a parallel between the way that LGBT groups are treated to the way that characters like Nimona are treated. She's vilified for being different from the norm, and it takes Ballister's kindness and acceptance to make her feel good about herself once again. Although, strangely enough, it's Ballister who's gay, yet Nimona is the victim of prejudice instead. So I suppose these parallels aren't exactly one-to-one, as Ballister would only have struggles in the real world, whereas Nimona's struggles are actually present within the movie itself. So whilst the parallel does still work between the characters, they are still very different in some ways. Although, in saying that, many people have pointed out the fact that Nimona does actually have her own ties to the LGBTQ+ community. Or should I say, they have ties to it. Yeah, many people have pointed out the non-binary parallels to Nimona, as present through the shifting.
The shape shifting. I mean, does it hurt, or does it...
Honestly, I feel worse when I don't do it.
For most of the movie, they appear as a girl, but they do become a boy at points, and Ballister does comment on this.
And now you're a boy.
I am today.
In fact, some of the dialogue in this movie does actually have parallels to what transphobics often say.
Can you just be you, please?
I don't follow.
Go, you.
But I'm not a girl.
And because of this, the wider thematic readings that you can take away from the representation within this movie extends to the greater issues of transphobia in the world. Nowadays, it feels like the trans and non-binary communities are the scapegoats for all current problems, as they have all been vilified by people like the TERFs, the trans-exclusionary reactionary fascists as I like to call them. Trans and non-binary people are, in simple terms, seen as monsters by the real monsters of the world, just like how Nimona was perceived. Now I will admit that I don't fully have an understanding of what I'm talking about here, as I am a cis man, I'm just going off of what other people have said. But regardless, I think that it's a brilliant reading which adds a lot to the film, and it even makes the representation here a lot stronger for me, because it ties into the wider themes of the film. And I just looked it up, and it seems like the original writer for Nimona has had their own journey of gender identity throughout the years, so this reading was clearly 100% intentional. This is just awesome to see, and it's what prevents this film from feeling corporate in any way with its representation, as it is very clearly a personal story from the heart, and its themes and representation are essential to every aspect of this movie. And I think that all of these factors are a main reason for why I liked Nimona as much as I did. And if someone told me that this is one of their favourite movies, I would 100% understand. I imagine that this is an important movie for so many people, and I just know that it definitely hit others in the same way that the movie Pride hit me. But I admittedly can't say that I adored all of this movie, as I did have some pacing issues with the first half here. Now, I did love the chaotic energy of the first half, and I thought that Ballister and Nimona made for a brilliant and hilarious duo, thanks to the contrast between the chaos and the neutrality. But I really struggled to follow along what was actually happening. In contrast to a lot of other movies, Nimona's pacing wasn't too slow, and was instead too fast. So much seemed to happen at once during these earlier scenes, and the non-stop energy made it so I just couldn't really register what was going on. It was all just zip zip zip, and I was left just telling the film to wait a minute so I could catch up. Now, to be fair, this may not be an issue for me on a rewatch, but at the moment, I just found the film a bit overwhelming at points, which thus made it harder for me to truly feel the film until it became a bit more dramatic in its second half. Thankfully, the film did still know when to slow down for the important moments, so I still thought that the second half was fantastic on the whole. Now obviously, I could also criticise the movie for how it looks, as the animation definitely isn't handsome some of the time. But I'm not going to do that, because that wasn't this film's fault. Disney screwed it over after all. I'm just glad that we got a chance to watch it. That's ultimately way more important to me. And also, I've made it clear before that I never care about weak animation. The story and characters are good here, and that's more important to me. And hell, it's not like the visuals are even bad here. I mean, I love the way that the world looks, for instance. It's got a unique aesthetic thanks to this blend between medieval knights and a futuristic Blade Runner-esque world. It's really cool. I also love the animation during Nimona's fake backstory scene near the start. It used that funky train tunnel animation, I don't actually know what this technique is called, in order to tell the story, and it just looks so unique and cool. It's a visual moment which really stood out to me ever since I saw it. I just love it when films can experiment with different types of animation. So overall, Nimona is a brilliant film. It's so entertaining with so much hilarious banter between the main characters, but it equally knows when to slow down for its emotional beats, and I think that thematically, this film is really strong thanks to many factors, and I will always respect it for its willingness to present LGBT themes to a much more mainstream audience. It's an important film for so many, and whilst I may have some minor flaws with it here and there, I still love a lot about it, and I can see it getting even better for me on a rewatch. Screw you Disney for kneecapping this movie's visuals, but hey ho, at least we can still watch it.
I expect to be able to see the sea.
You can see the sea. It's over there between the land and the sky.
I think it's fair to say that modern Disney movies are a little bit divisive. Whilst there are plenty of people who will jump to defend a lot of their films from the 2010s and 2020s, these films do still have a lot of criticizers, including myself who obviously wasn't massive on Big Hero 6 and actively disliked Raya and Ralph Breaks the Internet. Even one of the movies from this era which I adore, still has plenty of people who don't like it for various reasons, and that's without going into the hate that films like Encanto get in spite of their popularity and my personal enjoyment. So yeah, I often find it hard to recommend the films from this era, because I have no idea whether people will actually like them due to their slightly divisive reputation. But, there are some exceptions to this rule. Tangled is obviously the main exception, as everybody loves it, but that was snubbed from the Oscars, so I can't talk about it here. However, on this list there are two other modern Disney films which I think still have a mostly positive reception to them. I'll talk about one of said films later, but for now, I can safely say that Moana is a movie which I really can't see many people disliking. It's a very simple film, no doubt, but that's exactly why I and a lot of other people really like it. It was just a nice breath of fresh air from Disney. A simple, return to form, fun adventure musical with plenty of strong characters and banger songs. It's got basically everything that you could want from Disney, and I totally understand why this is a favourite for so many people, because I know that I certainly enjoyed it too. I think that the easiest thing for me to praise when it comes to this movie is the songs. I'm going to be brutally honest here. I think that this film may have my favourite musical soundtrack out of any animated movie that I've ever seen, or it's at least tied with The Prince of Egypt for that title. Every song within this movie is a banger for me, and even the less memorable ones still stuck out to me on this rewatch. But the best songs in this movie, like How Far I'll Go and You're Welcome, are so good that I flawlessly remembered the lyrics to them in spite of how long it's been since I last listened to them, and I can safely say that I've had many of them on repeat in the months since watching this movie for this video. They are just masterful, and the visuals are also spectacular within many of these songs, especially Shiny where the colours and lighting go all wacky. So yeah, the songs slap, which is definitely a good thing for this film, because a lot of its drama and emotion comes from its songs. I don't know why I need to say that, you all know how musicals work. This means that my love for these songs help the emotional beats to stick out to me even further, and they are a lot more effective than they would be if I thought the songs were mid. But another major reason for why this film works so well for me is thanks to the strong main two characters. Moana is easily one of my favourite Disney protagonists. She's funny, capable, determined, and kind, but she's not perfect at the same time, and we still get to see her grow over the course of the film, as she becomes a more skilled wayfinder who's eventually able to truly understand who she is. I just love watching her journey, and she's a great person to spend 90 minutes with. Although, I don't just love her during the adventure, as I was also deeply invested by her struggles as the new chief. I gotta say, I really liked how unselfish Moana is. Yes, she has a desire to go to the sea, but she still prioritises the well-being of the people on the island first and foremost, which thus shows why she should become chief. The whole reason why this journey even takes place is because Moana needs to restore the heart of Te Fiti, and she does this in order to protect those on her island from the darkness that's being spread. She thinks of her people first in every instance, and that's why she's a great leader and a great character. It was also really nice to see Moana succeed at the end through her compassion and observation. She's the only one who ended up sympathising with Te Kā, and that's ultimately what saved the day. This moment just showed how much of an awesome character Moana is. I just love her. And I also love Maui as well, as he has that perfect kind of comedic chaos which is needed to balance out the more serious yet inexperienced Moana. Plus, his demigod powers are always really cool to see, and it was nice to see him become less full of himself as the film went on. Some of the smaller side characters within this movie are also really strong, I feel. Grandma Tala is an absolute legend, obviously, and I also really like the conflict of interest between Moana and her father, and I especially liked how they actually gave Moana's father a valid reason to be so opposed to Moana's drive for the ocean. It just made him a lot more sympathetic and relatable, I feel. And alongside the humans, the various animals shown within this movie were great as well. Puo was adorable, and I was surprised by how much I loved Hey Hey on this latest rewatch, as I used to find him annoying and stupid, but now he's consistently making me laugh. And of course, we've got the drab little crab in the realm of monsters, Tamatoa. I love this guy. He's easily the funniest character in the movie, who also gets a sick as hell villain song. But he's also quite thematically interesting. I know a lot of people think that his scenes were quite unnecessary, as it was essentially a plot detour, but I still think that it was necessary for the wider themes of this film, as it aided Maui's character arc massively. Basically, Tamatoa is very similar to Maui in a lot of ways. They're both egotistical beings who had the fishhook for a time. Yet Tamatoa is obviously a lot more evil and unlikable, whereas Maui isn't at that stage. Yet. However, he could get there if his ego is fed even further. That's why it was necessary for a being similar to Maui to completely wipe the floor with him, thus humbling him. After the Tamatoa scenes, Maui becomes a lot more humble and likable, and is thus more willing to listen to and work with Moana, which shows that he is a more likable and redeemable character than Tamatoa, who is still stuck at the bottom of the ocean refusing to change. So yeah, the Tamatoa scenes were really interesting and entertaining for me, as well as being easily the most visually interesting part of the movie, alongside the ending of You're Welcome. In saying that though, the visuals within this film are really strong on the whole. The colours are very vibrant, I love how expressive the characters are, and yes, that includes the ocean of all things, and on the topic of the ocean, I have to say that that is some very nice looking water. Like, wow, that looks so gorgeous, and this is coming from a thalassophobe. So yeah, I love so much about Moana. In saying that though, I do admittedly have some flaws with it, mostly in regards to the plot. I'll be honest, I don't find a lot of the main adventure that interesting. I love the character stuff, no doubt, but I equally find that a lot of the ocean scenes kinda blended together for me, because the visuals and settings aren't really allowed to be all that interesting, because the film wanted to capture the emptiness of the ocean. I think this may be a major reason for why I like the Tamatoa detour, as it was a much different and more memorable location than just the sea. Oh, and can we all agree that the Kakamora scene was kinda pointless? Like, it just felt sandwiched in, and it really didn't have the same thematic relevance as the Tamatoa scenes. And speaking of feeling kinda pointless, yeah, I'm not really a fan of the forced breakup scene between Moana and Maui. It's a played up trope and really didn't feel warranted here, especially because Maui comes back for the final fight by his own accord anyway. So like, what was even the point of this scene? Oh well, if it had to exist just so that we could get that phenomenal I am Moana scene, then I can't exactly get too mad, as that scene always gives me major goosebumps in the best possible way. So yeah, I think that kind of sums up my thoughts on Moana as a whole. It is a movie which is just so easy to enjoy that any criticisms that I might have don't really feel like a big deal to me. And this is exactly why I think that it's a modern Disney movie which I just can't picture someone disliking. It obviously deserved a nomination, but I'm not personally in the camp of people who believe that it deserved to win the Oscar, as there's a certain other 2016 Disney movie which I vastly preferred, plus a more obscure film which I also liked more than this. But we'll get to talking about them too later. For now though, I can safely say that I will not be watching the live action remake of this film, because fuck you. And I'm also not watching the sequel because I have much better things to watch. Like Meglos. Meglos! Oh well, at least this original film will continue to hold the test of time.
Now somebody, anybody, everybody scream!
How to Train Your Dragon 2 is a movie which I really wish I loved more than I did. Granted, I still thought it was a fantastic movie and there is so much that I can praise here, but all of the pieces were here to make this a phenomenal movie, rather than just a fantastic one, and it could have even been better than the original, and you'll see how high I place the original film soon enough. However, it just wasn't able to quite reach these heights for me, purely because of one major factor which I can very easily identify. But before I talk about that, I really want to emphasize how great this movie actually is first and foremost. I think that the immediate thing to praise here is how well this film works as a sequel. Now, I think we all know by now that DreamWorks are the kings of sequels, and despite this being the weakest of the 4 DreamWorks sequels on this list, this statement is still true here, as it is practically a perfect follow-up from everything that the original film set up. The world is being expanded upon thanks to Hiccup actively exploring more of it, we finally meet Vikings who aren't from Berk, and we are given a much greater idea of how, despite all of its changes, Hiccup is still the outlier in the grand scheme of things. He may have embraced dragons, but most other people are still hostile to them. Speaking of embracing dragons, I love the way that this film showed how much life has changed for the Berkians ever since they fully integrated the dragons into their lives. They care for them as if they are family members and host dragon-specific games like sheep catching. That all makes so much sense and really fits in with this world, and it just generally feels like a natural evolution of the things set up initially. And finally, the characters have really grown here, which is immensely satisfying to see after the first movie, where the signs of growth were just beginning. I love the fact that this movie starts off 5 years later, as it gives the characters plenty of time in between the films to truly grow up and enter the next stage of their lives. As I said when talking about the Hidden World, the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy has a lot of clear themes of growth when viewed as a whole package, and that is once again very clearly present here. Hiccup feels a lot more sure of himself within this movie, and is also a hell of a lot more popular with everyone. This shows how he's truly evolved from being the weird loser in the original to a much more mature and respected adult here. But he has still got some room for growth, as he is a bit reckless at points, which thus paves the way nicely for the third movie. And alongside being great as his own character, his dynamic with Astrid is also a lot better here. In fact, Astrid as a whole is a much better character within this film. Spoilers for my opinions on the first movie, but one of my few criticisms with it was the fact that Astrid was kinda bland and uninteresting there. Here though, she's fantastic. She not only retains her command over the room, which allows for some great moments where she takes charge, but she's also become much lighter and more playful with Hiccup, now that they've had some time to fully become a proper couple, and it's just really great to see. I absolutely love these two together. And speaking of great character dynamics introduced within this movie, let's talk about Valka. While she may have lost all relevance by the third movie, she is still a really great character who is a key reason for why this film is so great. First of all, the scenes with her and Hiccup in the Dragon's Nest were absolutely mesmerizing and beautiful, and they were the one part of the movie to truly recapture that sense of awe which was initially felt regarding the dragons in the first movie. This movie doesn't have as many of those moments in comparison to the first and third movies, which makes sense because this is a more plot relevant middle chapter of the story, but it was nonetheless great to have at least one scene which captured this feeling through a new environment. And alongside that, I also just love Valka's personality and how it parallels with Hiccup. Both characters wanted to bring about change when it came to the treatment of dragons, and both were able to successfully tame the dragons and bond with them in their own ways. When Valka is shown within this movie, it suddenly makes total sense why Hiccup feels so different from his father. He took from his mother instead. This familial connection through a similar personality just makes the bond between mother and son that much stronger, and it gives me the impression that, despite the fact that she wasn't physically with Hiccup, a small part of her always stuck by him as he grew up. That's just a really beautiful idea. But I can't praise Valka without also mentioning Stoic. Oh man, what do I even say about this? Just the scene where the two of them finally reunite after God knows how long, and Stoic isn't mad at Valka for not returning sooner, and instead, he just mutters these simple words.
You're as beautiful as the day I lost you.
Oh, I can't handle it, bro. I just can't. Genuinely, that is one of the most beautiful and touching scenes that DreamWorks has ever created. It might even be my favourite moment from this entire franchise. It's just perfect in every way. Despite how tough Stoic may appear on the outside, he does have a caring side to him, and you can just see how much he truly loved his wife. And it's so nice to see them finally see each other once again, because they were kept apart for way too long. Oh, and then they do their special dance, and I just love it. Do you see why I was critical of the Hidden World now? I wanted more moments like this. Just a bit more heart in relation to the parts of the movie that lay just outside of the main plot, which thus helped to give the film so much extra substance and emotion to it. But alongside making the film more engaging, these beautiful moments also bring a lot more weight to some of the dramatic, emotional moments later on. And in this instance, I'm specifically referring to Stoic's death. Oh my goodness, why did DreamWorks have to pull this on me? It is extremely rare for any movie franchise to kill off a main character in the middle chapter. It's usually only ever done to a character we barely see at the start, or it's done at the very end of a franchise as the story comes to a close. And it is even rarer that any main character will die in a family movie. Yet this film actually had the guts to kill off Stoic at this point because it made narrative sense. It brought so much extra weight to the end of this film, and drastically impacted Hiccup's character moving forward, as he is now forced to act more responsibly as he's suddenly become the chief. But when putting that aside, the moment itself is just heartbreaking. It's sad enough when a character who you've grown to care for is killed, but it's made even more devastating here for two main reasons. Firstly, Stoic's just reunited with his love, and now the two have been split up again, and this time, it's permanent. Why you gotta do this to me, movie? I'm depressed now. And the second reason for why it was so impactful is because it was Toothless who was the one who killed Stoic. Not by choice, mind you, but you can still see how this harsh truth impacted Hiccup for a bit, before he learned to not blame his friend for something out of his control. It just brought a lot of extra compelling drama to the end of this film, whilst also making the scene even more devastating. So yeah, there's a lot of heavy things within this movie which legitimately hit me hard, and there's so many flawlessly executed moments here. And as for some miscellaneous positives, Hiccup and Toothless are still the perfect duo, obviously, and I appreciated all of the neat little setups and payoffs present within the narrative here, such as with Toothless learning to solo glide over the course of the movie, or the mention of how the baby dragons don't listen to anyone, which thus perfectly leads into them not being hypnotized by the alpha. And all of this praise is without mentioning the animation. Holy shit, why is the animation for this movie not praised more? Seriously, it is one of the most impressive animated movies that I have ever seen, primarily thanks to its battle scenes. I mean, just look at the Battle of the Dragon's Nest. Look at it. Look at how many models are doing stuff in the background here. There's gotta be at least a couple hundred people independently moving on the ground, and that's without mentioning all of the dragons in the sky. It is practically a Lord of the Rings battle in terms of scale, but animated. That is an incredibly impressive feat, and I imagine that it must have been an absolute bitch to render. But man, it was worth it. Give more appreciation to the animation here, please. So yeah, this movie looks great and it nails the emotional moments. If we just look at the things that I've talked about thus far, this movie is a slam dunk masterpiece. But damn it, Drago is such a mid-villain that it actively pisses me off. Yes, Drago Bloodvest is the sole reason for why I can't rank this movie any higher, because I just do not care for him. Now granted, he is set up really well. That flashback scene was haunting, and the part where he held back the dragon's fire was intimidating and badass. He just looked like a menacing force who you would not want to mess with. And then he starts screaming his head off, and just like that he loses all of his menace. Seriously, whenever he screams, I cannot take him seriously, as it is just so campy more than anything. It was probably intended to be scary, but it certainly didn't do that for me, and instead, it provided me with the most laughs from this entire franchise. And the sad part is that I'm only half joking. Now, I don't have a problem with campy villains. I mean, Ursula's my queen after all. But Drago was very clearly meant to be taken seriously rather than being a camp diva. So when I'm laughing at him, it just doesn't work within the context of this film. Also, he's a bland as hell character. Not every villain needs to be deep or complex, but Drago is someone who is just begging for a deeper motive or an interesting backstory. But we don't really get either. I mean, we briefly hear a bit about his backstory where he talks about how his family were killed by dragons, but even then, that's only told to us rather than shown. All of this just makes him feel like he's nothing more than the bad guy, and that's it. It's just really dull, honestly. In fact, I'll be brutally honest here. I genuinely think that Drago is on the same tier as the Chameleon in terms of DreamWorks villains. Yes, I really mean that, and no, I will not retract that statement. In saying all of that though, the film does still somewhat make up for a weak Drago, thanks to how he impacts upon other parts of the film. Obviously he was responsible for Stoic's death, which is already significant, but I also think that he lends himself to an interesting theme, all about the fact that some people are just evil. Hiccup wants to befriend Drago and talk out their differences. However, that's just not realistically possible with some people, and Hiccup realizes this the hard way when his misguided, reckless actions gets his father killed. I just think it's interesting that this film had the guts to show that some people can't be reasoned with, and I think that is especially interesting looking at this movie nowadays, as this is the kind of story that Disney desperately needs to tell with its antagonists, especially after how much they butchered everything with Namari. So yeah, this positive aspect helps this movie to still remain strong in spite of its one major flaw. Therefore, I'd still call the movie great. Although, I do have some smaller flaws with this film as well, such as with the annoying side characters, who are more annoying here than they were in the original film. But, once again, that's really minor in the grand scheme of things. And even then, Gobber is still epic, and I also enjoyed Eric, son of Erit, and the character arc they went on here. As I said, the good in this movie helps to make the bad less bad. So overall, I think that How to Train Your Dragon 2 is absolutely fantastic in so many ways, particularly regarding its emotional beats. But it's not quite up there when compared to the original film and the other DreamWorks sequels, because Drago just ain't that great. Still, he's not the worst thing ever, which therefore means that this movie is still able to remain great on the whole. I really liked it a lot. And just like that, I have now talked about 52 of the films on this list. And you know what that means? Whoa, we're halfway there.
Father, when can I leave to be on my own?
Don't dare finish that sentence. Don't do it. I'm sick of it.
First Tim Burton, then Wes Anderson, and now Guillermo del Toro. All these famous auteur directors have dabbled in the animated medium, and I couldn't be happier about it. and strangely enough, they've all worked with stop motion specifically. I don't know why, but I'm not complaining, I love stop motion. Maybe these guys just like the precise control that stop motion can bring, and so are able to work as closely to how they work in live action. Either way, all of them are talented directors who I love, and I'm so glad that I got to talk about them on this list. However, unlike Burton and Anderson, who I've seen the entire filmographies of, I've actually only seen a couple Guillermo del Toro films. I've seen Pan's Labyrinth, The Shape of Water, The Devil's Backbone, and, the subject of this segment, Pinocchio. So this does unfortunately mean that I won't be giving ultra in-depth thoughts about Del Toro as a director in comparison to Burton and Anderson, as I can't confidently give an opinion of the man's talent as a whole, as I haven't seen most of it. Although, he would be a very good director to watch the filmography of. I'm gonna put a pin in that. Regardless, from what I have seen, I love Del Toro's work. I think that he is one of the most visionary directors who we currently have, and I absolutely adore the way that he looks at the world. No matter how dark his stories can be thematically, his films always look stunning, and they are so well made in every aspect, from framing, to lighting, to sound, to editing. Del Toro and his team should be allowed to cook whatever they want, as all the films that I have seen from them are fantastic and very unique. In fact, I've even spoken about Pan's Labyrinth in detail in my old film studies ranking, so if you're curious about other Del Toro opinions, then feel free to check that video out. Although The Shape of Water is still my favourite Del Toro film. So yeah, all this praise is being done so you can fully understand that I love Del Toro as a director. And unlike Burton and Anderson, I don't know a single person who dislikes this guy and his work. So it's no wonder why I and everyone else loved Pinocchio. It's just got all of its best attributes while still standing on its own 2 feet, and there is so much to praise here. I mean, first of all, I just mentioned how much I love the worlds of Del Toro, and Pinocchio is yet another excellent looking film in how it presents its visuals, as it has a wide variety of incredibly unique locations, which are shown with stunning lighting and colour. The editing throughout this film is also impeccable. In terms of the visual aesthetic of this film, I feel like it's clear to me that Del Toro approached this movie with the mindset of making it like how a child would see the world for the first time, which would naturally reflect Pinocchio's feelings. So much wonder and so much hope are reflected within the brighter and more vibrant scenes, and I think that these moments really help to sell that childlike wonder that we all had, and they also make the later, bleaker looking scenes more effective, as this childlike wonder and innocence is torn away as a result of war. The loss of childhood innocence is a common theme within Del Toro's other work, especially in Pan's Labyrinth, so it makes sense why it's here too. In general, I think that Pinocchio excels at using its aesthetic quality to tell a deeper story. Del Toro is one of the best filmmakers when it comes to how he uses his visuals to present the film's themes, and it was just great to see this technique being used within Pinocchio as well. And I also have to imagine that this film must have been quite freeing for Del Toro to make. Live action films are obviously limited in production due to real world rules, yet with animation, you can literally do whatever you want. I can definitely tell that Del Toro was excited by the possibility that the medium could bring to him, as he ended up being really creative with his ideas and visuals throughout this film, and it all just looks so gorgeous. And I already know that Del Toro has plans for future animated movies, and I eagerly await their release as they're going to be awesome too. I know his animation is cinema statement has been forever tainted by brain-dead Twitter users who completely misrepresented what he meant, but I'm nonetheless happy that people like him exist within the medium, as he clearly does have a respect for the art form, which can be seen everywhere within Pinocchio, which thus makes it a great watch. But, putting aside my love for Guillermo del Toro, is Pinocchio any good outside of its 10 out of 10 visuals? Well, it's mostly excellent, but I'd be lying if I called the film perfect, because it really isn't. Unfortunately, I do have some minor issues with this film, and as a result, this is actually one of my lesser favourite Del Toro films that I've seen. Still brilliant, no doubt, but just not flawless. Let's just get these issues out of the way now so I can go back to praising Guillermo Totoro. I would say that there are 3 main issues that I have with this film. First of all, I'm kinda mixed on the songs. They're okay, but not the most memorable, and some sounded a bit off to me. I don't know if that's because of the songs themselves or the singers though. Next, I thought that Sebastian Cricket was a pretty nothing character who barely played a part in the overall story. He doesn't really do much as Pinocchio's conscience in the same way that Jiminy Cricket did, and so he feels kinda pointless to the story for the most part. He was still necessary to bring Pinocchio back to life at the end of the film, but honestly, he kinda felt like he was only included because people expect a Cricket character in a Pinocchio story. And that point leads me on to my final critique. I, ironically enough, think that this movie is at its worst when it's trying to follow the Pinocchio story. I'll talk about this upcoming point more in a sec, but I love the way that this film subverts the classic Pinocchio story to tell something new. That stuff is brilliant, but the presence of these subversions within this movie does mean that the stuff which is lifted directly out of the book with minimal changes kinda clashes with it. I'm specifically referring to the ending with this point. I'll be honest, I never liked the whale stuff in other Pinocchio stories like Disney's for example, as it always felt like a very random inclusion which contrasted with everything else before it. Like, Pinocchio's just going about his day, and then suddenly Geppetto has been eaten by a giant sea monster, and then there's this big epic fight where Pinocchio dies at the end. What's this got to do with being a real boy? I never got it. And sadly, that opinion is no different here. It feels like this whole epic climax was included purely because other adaptations of the story have it, but it really doesn't fit in here. It's just there so that Pinocchio can die properly at the end, before being eventually brought back to life again. Yeah, I suppose this plotline kinda works, but I just feel like in this story about war, it would make more sense for Pinocchio to die in a war. But that's not what happens. By the end of this film, all the brilliant war stuff is just kind of forgotten about in favour of a really random, over-the-top final act, which felt more like a mandatory inclusion rather than a natural part of the story. I know other people like this ending well enough, and it definitely does look amazing and is exciting for what it is, but I just think that it clashed hard with what this film was going for beforehand, and so I wasn't the most engaged by it overall. However, that's all of my problems with the movie. So basically I only had issues with one character, a few songs, and the final act. Everything else, meanwhile, is practically perfect, and I'll start my next round of praise by talking about the subversions to the original story that I just mentioned a minute ago. You see, Pinocchio was initially created as a moral lesson for young boys. I don't know how much any of you know about the original Pinocchio story, but the whole book is essentially just Pinocchio being the most obnoxious twat in the world, before eventually getting tortured and even hanged for it. The message of the book is basically telling young boys to obey the rules or else. It's a very basic message which was designed in a way to get 19th century kids to listen to their parents when they're trying to raise them to be decent members of society. However, this film takes that basic message and looks at it a bit closer and actually criticizes it. Whilst the film does still show a great father-son relationship where Pinocchio learns enough about the world and its hardships to realize that he should listen to what Geppetto says and shouldn't lie or run away or anything, the film equally doesn't align itself with the ideas of total obedience that the book seems to imply. Del Toro is very outspoken against total obedience, and so it's only natural that he would criticize a message which seems to believe in that. And this criticism comes out within this film through the story's new setting of fascist Italy. Now, anti-fascist themes are present within so many Del Toro films. It's an idea that he's very passionate about, and it was honestly really great to see him implement it once again within this version of Pinocchio, because it just fits so well with the idea that you actually shouldn't blindly obey everything that you're being told. As Pinocchio grows as a person, he learns to obey some orders, yet he also rejects others. Whilst he listens to Geppetto more over the course of the film, he also stands up for himself and Candlewick near the end of the story, by refusing to obey the orders of this fascist general. It's a very mature and prescient direction to take the story in, and I really appreciated its inclusion. It helped this adaptation of the story to stand out more, and it brought a lot of extra weight to the original source material. And alongside its thematic links, the anti-fascist stuff is just really great here on the whole. I already mentioned how much I loved the way that this film portrayed the loss of childhood innocence over time, particularly with the boys' camp near the end, but my goodness, Pinocchio's disses towards Mussolini were legendary. Fuck you, Mussolini. Del Toro, you're a legend for including this scene in what is technically a family movie. That's just awesome. And alongside the anti-fascist themes presented, I also loved the way that Geppetto was reworked within this version of the story. Geppetto was always a bit of a nothing character who didn't really have much to him outside of being Pinocchio's father. Yet here, he's given actual emotional depth. In this film, he only created Pinocchio as a result of his grief over losing Carlo during the war. This therefore gives Pinocchio's creation a lot more tragedy, and it leads in well to Geppetto's internal conflict about how he feels about Pinocchio, because Pinocchio isn't Carlo, but Geppetto wants him to be. This gives Geppetto a great arc where he learns to accept Pinocchio as his own, different boy. It makes the relationship between the two much stronger, and it once again helps this film to stand out from the rest. Side note, but I love the fact that Pinocchio's creation within this movie isn't magical or anything. Instead, it's dark, tragic, and has a much closer connection to Frankenstein rather than Pinocchio, which is nice foreshadowing for Del Toro's upcoming movie. It's really upsetting to see Geppetto in a drunken state where he's reached his breaking point and is desperately trying to recreate his son out of wood, only for it to end up working, but not in the way that he had hoped. It's just really interesting to see, and at least there's some great drama, and And as I said, it makes the father-son dynamic a hell of a lot more interesting here. As Sebastian Cricket said, this is a story about imperfect fathers and imperfect sons. That's a lot more compelling to watch than a flawed child and his always right authority figure. It gives both characters more depth here and allows for them both to grow more over time. It's great stuff. In general, I find the family stuff very sweet here. And speaking of sweet, can I just say that the score for this movie is excellent. I may not have loved the songs, but Alexandra Desplat's instrumental soundtrack is just phenomenal, which is expected for a Del Toro film. And as for some other miscellaneous things that I loved here, the voice acting was great across the board, and it was really fun to point out actors who I knew, such as David Bradley, Ewan McGregor, and Cate Blanchett as the non-English speaking monkey. Yeah, I'm not kidding, that's actually Cate Blanchett making the monkey noises, and that's literally all she does in this movie. Okay, I will fully admit, that's pretty funny. But honestly, the thing that I love more than Cate Blanchett's role in this movie is the reason for why she's in this movie. You see, Blanchett took this role because she loved working with Del Toro so much on Nightmare Alley that she practically begged him to give her any part in his next movie, even if it was just a fork or something. And as a result, Del Toro gave her the role of Spassatura. That's honestly so wholesome. Imagine being so respected as a director that a high caliber actor would happily do monkey noises and nothing else for you for free. That's just awesome. I love you, Del Toro. And speaking of high caliber actors, I'm obviously a big fan of Christoph Waltz's inclusion within this movie, as he is one of my personal favourite actors, and he was once again just a delight to listen to within this movie. He's got a fantastic voice and a brilliant stage presence, which thus means that he's a villain who can command the screen so well. This is why I enjoyed watching him as Count Volpe. He was a delightfully evil villain who was so fun to watch, but he did still pose a legitimate threat within this story. So yeah, Christoph Waltz is great here. I don't know why he's been typecast as villains in anti-fascist themes made by auteur directors, but hey ho, he's fantastic at it. Anywho, that's pretty much all I needed to say regarding this film. Overall, I love so much about Del Toro's Pinocchio, from the direction, to the visuals, to the anti-fascist themes, and the new ideas for Geppetto. But I just wish that this movie was more willing to do its own thing, rather than desperately trying to include all of the iconic parts of the original Pinocchio story, in spite of the fact that it didn't really fit within this context. If the final act was cleaned up a bit, then this movie would be much better for me. But as it stands, it's a really great watch, but not my go-to Del Toro film. But still, I'm very excited to see what animated movies he'll come out with next, and I was more than happy to see The Goat win an Oscar for this movie. Even though there are two other movies from the 2022 batch which I liked a lot more, I still thought that this was a more than worthy win.
You're hard-fitted indeed. Being a pirate is a right indeed. Do what you want, cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate.
Well, time for me to get patriotic once again with another British classic. The Pirates and an Adventure with Scientists is one of the most entertaining films for this entire list for me. It is off the wall, crazy and quirky, and I adored it to bits. I laughed so many times whilst watching, and many parts of this movie will never leave my brain, and I actively don't want them to. I love this movie so much. Now yes, I will admit that my love doesn't extend that much further beyond me finding it hysterical, but I really don't care. My love that I'm expressing here is genuine. I'm ranking it this highly because I think that is one of the funniest movies from this whole list. I mean, come on, this is the movie which features the surprisingly curvaceous pirate. Comedy just doesn't get much better than that. Actually, on the subject of the comedy, I really love all of the random decisions that this film makes in regards to its characters. Like, I love how none of the pirates actually have names and are instead simply referred to as the pirate captain, or the aforementioned surprisingly curvaceous pirate, or, my personal favourite name, the pirate who loves sunsets and kittens. It's so random, I love it! And alongside the pirates, this movie also features Charles Darwin. Now, you would think that a brilliant scientist like Darwin would be portrayed as an intelligent man who is viable to the characters and provides them with great knowledge. However, this movie instead decides to make Charles Darwin a pathetic incel virgin. Okay, that's certainly a unique way to portray him, but I love it so much. Although, as great as Darwin is, he's admittedly kind of overshadowed by the legendary Mr. Bobo. Okay, sure, he's not as good as Gromit in terms of silent Aardman characters, but he is nonetheless hilarious and iconic, and is still able to stand out thanks to the amazing flip card jokes. And then there's Queen Victoria, who, instead of being portrayed as an elegant, respectable lady, is instead a ruthless mad bitch who wants to eat the pirate captain's dodo bird. Truly the most historically accurate depiction of Queen Victoria ever made. And alongside the characters, there's so many other wonderful things about this film, such as the unique visual sequences on the maps, the consistently creative and bonkers action scenes at the bath ride or the final fight on the ship, and there are just too many random yet equally hilarious moments for me to count. I mean, for goodness sake, there's a scene where Jane Austen bullies the Elephant Man. Why? I don't know, but it made me laugh more than any scene from a lot of other films on this list. So you know what? Fuck it. I love it. However, just like with all the other Aardman films, I think I mainly love this film in particular, less so for the comedy itself, and more so for the British wit, charm, and personality present here. As I said before, British humour just hits differently for me, which thus makes all the jokes funnier in my mind. And alongside the wit, I feel like the all-star British cast is also a large factor for why I find the film so charming and enjoyable. I mean, we've got Hugh Grant, Martin Freeman, and Imelda Staunton, who are all great as usual, but we've also got David Tennant here as Charles Darwin, who, well, I'm a Doctor Who fan. I shouldn't have to explain why I automatically love David Tennant in anything he's in. Oh, and even the legendary Brian Blessed has a small role in this movie as the Pirate King, who's basically the host of the pirate version of the Oscars. Hey look, that joke's relevant to this video. And yes, before anyone asks, the Pirate King is a much better host than Jimmy Kimmel will ever be. But I assume that went without saying because, you know, it's Brian Blessed.
I am King Yakana!
So yeah, I just adore pretty much everything about this movie. Okay, sure, the characters don't really develop much, and there are definitely some cliche plot points in the middle, here and there, yada yada yada, generic criticisms towards this movie, but I honestly don't care. This movie is just an absolute blast from start to finish, and rewatching it was some of the most fun that I had from this entire marathon. Plus, as can be expected from Aardman, the animation is amazing here. The water scenes especially look so impressive. So overall, The Pirates and Adventure with Scientists is an amazing movie, which once again makes me proud to be British. Objectively speaking, it probably should be a few spots lower, but I'd honestly much rather rewatch this movie than everything ranked below it, so I'm sticking with this placement. I suppose this is just the unintended consequence of doing a ranking which features a pure comedy like this, which works for me in every way, alongside dramas which I may have issues with. The placements can seem a little bit off on the outside, but this is just how I personally feel, and I'm more than happy with ranking this movie so high. Just let us Brits have our moment, please. Also, can I just rant for a second? America, why did you change the title for this film? The Pirates Band of Misfits? What does that even mean? It's so vague. Pirates of the Caribbean could be called the Pirates Band of Misfits and it would still work. You see the problem? It's just too vague. This film is about scientists, so it makes way more sense to actually include them within the title, you know? Did scientists seriously have too many boring connotations for it to sell to American kids? Ugh, knowing Americans, it probably did. That's just so stupid. Why can't Americans just follow the rest of the world? For once, why have they always got to screw everything up to their own liking? I just hate Americanization so goddamn much, and so I am even more proud when I find British movies which are unapologetically British, without trying to appeal to American audiences. Anyway, I should probably move on before I start offending all of my American viewers. TLDR, The Pirates and Adventure with Scientists is a banger movie which I love wholeheartedly.